David Griffin, in his postseason media availability, said that the Pelicans were going to be aggressive this offseason. And Friday evening, the Pelicans delivered on that promise of being aggressive, and they might not be done. Of course, trading with the Atlanta Hawks to land Dejounte Murray, bringing him in, and there's still some holes on the roster as well. So Jake Madison, host of Locked On Pels on Twitter @NolaJake, joins the show. Jake, we appreciate it as always. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on to talk some hoops.
Absolutely. Hey, man, exciting times. Pels kind of blew up the news cycle a little bit the last three or so days. Let's start with the Dejounte Murray trade. How did it come about and initial reaction?
Yeah, I mean, this is something it seems like they've been working on for a while. They inquired with the Atlanta Hawks back at February's trade deadline to see if they could maybe pry Dejounte Murray away from them then. No deal was able to get done, but the Pelicans quickly, as soon as the season pretty much ended and the offseason began, restarted those talks. And ultimately, you looked at Atlanta as a team that needed to just break up their two backcourt players in Dejounte Murray and Trey Young. And while I think Trey Young's shooting would have been really great here in New Orleans, I think they viewed Murray, who's much bigger. He's 6'5" versus Trey Young being a smaller guard. Someone who's been an elite defender before, and that's kind of really where the Pelicans' identity is. I think they viewed him as the guy they want to be their floor general. They've been lacking a point guard. David Griffin said at that end-of-season media availability they needed some more basketball IQ out here on this team. I think they view Murray as kind of a buy low candidate. I don't really think they gave up too much to get a player of his caliber, a former All-Star. So they bring him in to pair alongside C.J. McCollum in the backcourt to be that table setter for Zion Williamson. And when you look at this past season for New Orleans, they struggled in fourth quarters. They were 0-24, I think is the stat, when they were trailing going into the fourth quarter when it comes to winning games. And that's certainly not going to make you an elite team. I think they view Dejounte Murray as someone who can create buckets, can go out and score and set other guys up, in clutch situations, something that New Orleans struggled with this past season. So I think they feel really good about this move. And frankly, I was a little bit shocked that Brandon Ingram wasn't included in this deal. And they managed to get this done without having him traded to Atlanta.
We're going to get to Brandon Ingram. A couple more on Murray. You kind of ran through a little bit of it there. He seems like a pretty complete player. I mean, he averaged just below 10 assists in his time with the Spurs. His three-point shooting took a big jump in Atlanta. Everyone was, tweeting out his steal statistics and comparing him with Herb Jones. Is there one part of his game that you see that really stands out to you more than any other?
I wouldn't say it's one thing. He's a pretty well-rounded player. I think you can kind of look at the different aspects of his game and see how they're really going to help this team. Much has been made about Brandon Ingram and his reluctance when it comes to three-point shooting. And Murray's the opposite. He's trended upwards in terms of three-point attempts every single season. So while he's not an elite shooter, he's willing to take three-pointers, and that's something that the Pelicans simply need. I think they like the idea of his defense in the backcourt. This is a defensive-focused team. They've been ranked sixth the past two seasons, and they make their money by forcing steals and getting out in transition and running. Murray has led the league in steals for the past three seasons, so you pair him with Herb Jones, and that keeps that Pelicans identity intact and maybe makes up for keeping a guy like C.J. McCollum, who's not an elite defender and who is a little bit undersized in the backcourt. With that size, though, he's also a good rebounder, and that's something that the Pelicans struggled with these past couple of years, is giving up offensive boards to opponents, struggled with defensive rebounding. You're going to get a guy like Dejounte Murray coming in and immediately helping with something like that. So I think they just kind of view everything with him as the type of guy that really fits this team and is exactly what they were looking for.
How much does this move elevate New Orleans' backcourt in terms of where you would position it in the NBA now?
I think I'm going to keep it in the Western Conference with
okay.
it. I think one of the reasons the Pelicans made a move like this, and I'm sure you're about to ask me next, or a question or two about Brandon Ingram and what's next for this team. They're kind of going for it, right? This is a move that definitely elevates them, whether or not they trade Brandon Ingram, and a trade for Ingram almost feels like a certainty now after this sort of thing. When you look at the Western Conference, it's kind of wide open. The Clippers got worse. The Warriors have gotten worse. A couple of other teams have kind of taken a step back here. So with everything being so uncertain, you're seeing New Orleans kind of push their chips in and go for it. So I don't know where it necessarily stacks their backcourt in terms of the NBA or the Western Conference, but I think you can safely say today that when you're looking at teams in the West, New Orleans has gotten better, and that's not something you can say for a lot of other elite teams right now.
All right, let's talk Brandon Ingram, because I was going to go there next. And you said the trade feels kind of most likely now. Why?
Part of it is they're just top heavy in terms of salary. You're now having basically four guys that are making $30 or more million, and that just doesn't work under the current collective bargaining agreement in the NBA. I also definitely think it's one of those things where it's like too many cooks, right? Too many chefs here. Of you have four guys that kind of need the ball in their hands a little bit. So it feels like one of them is going to be the odd man out. It's not going to be Zion Williamson. It's not going to be Murray, who they just traded for. And that kind of leaves you CJ McCollum or Brandon Ingram here. And this move was definitely made with maximizing CJ McCollum in mind, I think. Last year, they saw he was far better off ball than kind of being their point guard, the floor general for them. You know, this kind of covers up for his defensive issues. And that kind of then means that Brandon Ingram is likely going to be the guy who's going to be gone. And he probably has more value around the league than CJ McCollum does. So if you're trying to maximize your return on players in a trade, Ingram's the guy to go. And when you look at this team, there's still a couple of big holes. Point guard was one they needed to address, that they've stated they wanted to address, but they still need a starting center. Yes, they drafted Yves Missi in the first round, but he's nowhere near ready to be playing 30-plus minutes per game at the NBA. They need to go out and get a starting center. And what this move does, I think the Murray trade, which is what's so exciting about this, is it allows them to just think bigger than we were thinking when it comes to the starting center position. You know, on my show, Locked On Pelicans, I talked about maybe you can get Andre Drummond for dirt cheap. Well, now you could potentially, we don't know if this will happen, you could trade Brandon Ingram for a guy like Jared Allen, Miles Turner, guys that are all-star level players that would dramatically increase the level of talent here in New Orleans at a position of need. So now that you've gotten your point guard without having to include Brandon Ingram in a deal, the possibilities, I don't want to say are endless here, but they're certainly greater than they were before this trade. And I think that's what makes this so exciting. You were looking at trading Ingram for a point guard or a center, and you were still going to have to fill that position, the other one, you know, in a cheapish way. This now doesn't mean that at all. They're capable of kind of swinging whatever deal they want, and given that Ingram's got one more year left on his contract, the Pelicans don't want to pay him a max deal. I think that's why you look at him being traded.
With Ingram, would you foresee it being more a player swap, or would the Pelicans want to recoup some of the picks they did lose in the Murray trade?
You know, I think it could be either. And while I think fans might panic a little bit if you trade Ingram for picks that doesn't make you better today, the Pelicans have been clearly playing the long game here. And so we've seen that, and I talked about this on my show today, they've been linked to a team like the Sacramento Kings. You're not going to get De'Aaron Fox, their all-star point guard. You're not going to get Domantas Sabonis, their all-star big man in that trade. I don't even know if you get their best young player in Keegan Murray. You're looking at a deal that would be Harrison Barnes, Kevin Huerter, and say 2 first-round picks for Brandon Ingram. And when you think about that, the talent there coming back to New Orleans isn't better than Ingram, even if it's 2 players that would be useful and in the rotation for New Orleans. But that might mean you're able to go and get a center. You know, one of the things I mentioned at the beginning of this here with you is the Pelicans are top-heavy in terms of salary. You sometimes just need mid-tier salary, because in the NBA, if you're making a trade, you need to basically send out as much money as you're bringing back in terms of salaries. It can be tough to try and get a quality player when you have guys making $30 million or more and then guys making $7 million or less. So bringing back 2 players, one that makes, say, $18 million, the other one making $16 million, all of a sudden now you can kind of create a package that works in a bigger variety of trade options than you would have had with the roster currently. So it could be an indirect way towards getting to the end goal here. So while you trade Brandon Ingram for, role players and picks, you can then move all of those things for your starting center, and maybe that's more appealing. One of the things to keep in mind about Brandon Ingram is you're not just trading for Brandon Ingram if you're an opposing team. You're trading for Brandon Ingram and the extension that you're going to give him. You're not going to just trade for him and let him walk after 1 year. And if you want to be certain that he's going to stay with you, well, then you need to give him max money. And I think that's something that potentially scares a lot of teams off. and is maybe going to drive down his price. Maybe that's why you see the Cleveland Cavaliers not really interested in trading for a guy like him, because they're going to have to commit $208 million to him over 4 years. And if New Orleans doesn't want to do that, why should they?
Mm-hmm.
So trading Brandon Ingram for kind of like piecemeal, I think, and picks, and then repackaging all of that later down the line could get you that starting center or another player that you wouldn't be able to get in a direct Brandon Ingram trade.
With the that's a great breakdown, Jake. Actually, thank you. That was awesome. With the salary, you've mentioned it a couple times, and kind of where they are with that, and then trading, and you can recoup some of it and whatnot. How does that impact a potential extension for Trey Murphy?
I think he's going to get it no matter what. The extensions come out in the next couple of days. We'll see. I don't think there's really any concern here. This is someone that I think New Orleans wants to be in the starting lineup next year. We've seen him grow. He's an elite shooter in the league. You know, he grew an inch or so in the past year, too, so he's even taller than when he was when he entered the league. That sort of thing, I think, shows you that this player is going to get paid. And with the three-point shooting, and it's not just the three-point percentage, it's on the volume, too. This is a guy that if he was in the starting lineup, might take 10 threes or more per game. And it's also the variety of shots, too. He takes some of those really deep ones. You know, go back to whatever year it was when Steph Curry was at Davidson in college in the tournament. One of the things that stood out to me so much about that run that they had that first year was anytime he crossed half court, they threw a defender on him. He could be just a step over the half court line, and there was a defender glued to him because they were scared of him shooting. Think about that on this Pelicans team. When Trey Murphy takes threes from 30 to 35 feet away, and you know he's going to do it and he can make those, you have to defend it. That creates so much space for someone like Zion Williamson, and that's something we've been screaming that we need to see this team do more of. So when it comes down to it, look, I think you're going to see Trey get a 4 or 5 year deal. If it's 5 years, it's going to maybe be around $140 million total. He's certainly going to get a bag. That'll mean that in the future they need to look at trading C.J. McCollum in a year maybe, but that's borrowing a problem from the future. But Trey's certainly going to get paid and is going to have a very significant role on this team next year.
They promised aggressiveness. They have delivered, and they might not be done. Jake Madison, Locked On Pels, on Twitter, at Nola Jake. God, kind enough to give us some time here on After Further Review to talk about a very busy weekend for the New Orleans Pelicans. Dejounte Murray coming over from the Atlanta Hawks, and it looks like Brandon Ingram could be more than on the trading block. Jake, we appreciate the time as always. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.